Hi, welcome back to the studio, and I've actually got the first guest of the year in today, my old mate Andy Long, aka The Droid. We go back a very long way, over 40 years, done all kinds of stuff together back in the day, aircraft recoveries and all kinds. So delighted to have Andy back, because a few years ago, when we were just messing about with this YouTube stuff, we did a video about Andy's great interest, which is the Boulton Defiant turret fighter, which is not really a mainstream topic, is it, these days?
No.
And probably should be. So for those who don't know, the Defiant, I always describe Andy as a Defiant expert. Think about that. So this is the Defiant. This is what, Airfix 148?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
In night fighter colours. So the thing about the Defiant is it's a turret fighter. So it's got the same Merlin engine that powered the Spitfire and the Hurricane, and it's got a turret. And obviously the turret has got an air gunner in it, 4 Browning machine guns, and a whole load of extra weight on what's quite a big aircraft, isn't it?
Yeah.
The Defiant. So it's a bit of a checkered history.
Yeah.
The Defiant.
Yeah, very much.
Bit of a checkered history. So Andy, you're doing this encyclopedic book on the Defiant, which has been years in the making,
Yeah.
and still is, and we all want to read it. So, why the Defiant?
What first fired my interest was, remember when we did The Faithful Few?
Yeah.
About Worcestershire's Battle of Britain pilots.
Yeah.
And one chapter was about a guy called Dennis Williams.
Yes.
Now, Dennis was on 141 Squadron, Defiant pilot. His regular air gunner was a guy called Geoffrey Pledger, and that's where the interest started. 141 is the often very maligned Battle of Britain Defiant Squadron compared to 264 for various reasons, but that is where it came. And I'd collected material, and I'd sat on it for a long time. And then all of a sudden it realised that I'd got so much stuff there that there could be something that could bear fruit. And this is where we are now. It's just been like a natural, albeit very slow progression.
So what do you think then about the Defiant then, overall? What is the biggest misconception about the Defiant aircraft?
Biggest misconception is that a lot of people always, you read comments about them saying it's a bomber destroyer. Read the specification, it's a fighter.
Right.
A turret armed fighter. And the argument is that it was a turret armed fighter specifically to bring down bombers. Yeah, that was part of it. The other part is the fact that it was specifically used, supposed to be specifically used for day operations and relegated into night. No, the original specification was for a turret armed fighter, single engined or twin, with either a manned or remote operated turret, which Bristol's were very interested in, to be used by day and by night.
Yeah, Defiant by day and by night.
By night, yeah.
Which is the title of your book, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, and there's much more into the actual requirements, the specifications as to what was there. But yeah, okay. People sort of like get focused and say, yeah, it was purely as a bomber destroyer. Okay, not purely as a bomber destroyer. It was just one of the things that it was expected to do. However, one of the things that it was not expected to do was to dogfight. Dowding came out with that one straight away. I'm not expecting it to dogfight on its own. Ideally, it would be used in what they call a composite squadron, a mix.
Yeah. Which it was, wasn't it? I mean, time of Dunkirk and the fall of France. I mean, flights of Spitfires were escorting them, weren't they, over to Holland?
The first engagement, it was 264 and 66 Squadron. And it worked that well, because when they flew out, the Spitfires went to the front, Defiance went to the rear, and the Spit guys were quite happy because they said, we've got some tail protection.
Billy Burton was on it.
Yeah. And
flight commander in 66 at the time.
And there's a few other Battle of Britain guys who were out there. I can't remember his first name, Frank or Francis Rimmer, who was like killed with 229. Frank Rimmer killed with 229.
That's right.
There's Campbell Colquhoun, who later became actually a flight commander with 264.
But don't you think? I mean, this whole Defiant thing. You know, let's just track it back a bit because during the First World War, the Bristol fighter was a two-seater with a rearward-facing gunner and a pilot, and it was very successful, wasn't it? Bristol fighter. So that was really, you know, this was the monoplane version of the Bristol fighter, wasn't it? And it had great support at the Air Ministry from people like Sholto Douglas, who was Deputy Chief of the Air Staff in the Battle of Britain, who'd flown Bristol fighters, hadn't he, during the First World War. But these monoplanes were very different to the biplanes, and they were considerably faster, and therefore the human body was subjected to G-forces that were just not a thing in the First World War, and for that reason it was perceived that fighter-to-fighter combat just wouldn't happen again, because the human body wouldn't be able to stand the extra forces, you see. So it was also perceived that any air attack on Britain was going to come across the North Sea from Germany, and that would therefore be beyond the range of the Messerschmitt 109 single-seater fighter, so that these German bombers would be unescorted, wouldn't they? And therefore, having a turret fighter wasn't an issue. Although Dowding was never in favour of it, there were only ever 2 Defiant squadrons in the Battle of Britain. Dowding didn't want the Defiant at all. He thought that producing the Defiant was at the expense of more Spitfires and Hurricanes, and it was Spitfires and Hurricanes really that he needed at the time. But I think the biggest misconception about the Defiant is that it couldn't fire forward, but that's not true, is it?
No. I mean, you see many arguments of people saying it just couldn't fire forward. Yes, it could, but it had to be in very specific circumstances. The pilot had a spade grip. The pilot had a gun button. Now that gun button was connected, and the way the guns were fired on a Defiant they were fired electrically. So that there was a permanent connection from the spade grip to the turret.
Right.
And for it to be used in the forward roll, it meant that the air gunner had to put the guns forward. He had a switch.
Well, you can see that the turret is pointing forward there.
He had a master switch, which he could switch from gunner to pilot and basically lock the turret into place. The turret then, the guns had to be elevated to 22 degrees minimum above horizontal for the lower Brownings to clear the propeller arc. So then the pilot could, if he wanted to, thumb that button and fire.
It's a lot of faffing about there.
Yeah, it's a lot of and there's only you hear of these various stories about guns accidentally going off and it never being actually used. It was actually. I've got one instance of the pilot using the guns in combat at night against the Heinkel 111, and that was Air Vice Marshal Des Hughes on 264 Squadron. It wasn't forward.
He's not Australian.
No, he's Irish. He's
Irish.
He's Irish. And although it wasn't a case of the actual turret being locked forward, the canvas catch bags that were dangling in the turret to catch all the spent rounds jammed the turret, so the turret was actually locked out onto the beam. And his air gunner Fred Gatch, he ordered him to turn the controls to him, in which they formatted on a Heinkel, and he opened fire at it, and he used wing rocking motion to try and lead the fire into. he firmly believes, and Fred Gash believed that they actually did hit it, they damaged it, but there was no actual claim as to saying it was totally destroyed.
But of course, in fighter-to-fighter combat, everything's moving so quickly, and it's that hand-to-eye coordination, bang, 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 you know, that it just wasn't possible with Defiant, was it? I mean, you know, if you're attacking unescorted bombers, I guess you can, you know, you have time to position, to manoeuvre the turret and so on, and open fire. But in a fast-moving fighter skirmish, that's just not possible.
No.
And it was in those circumstances that the Defiant was really found lacking, wasn't it, in the Battle of Britain, and the crew suffered accordingly.
Yeah, it was
very sad.
It was when you look at the losses in the Battle of Britain, if there was any mutual support between the Defiants, then they did have a fighting chance. Break a Defiant formation, and that mutual support goes, and they start to become targets. And as with any other fighter, anybody comes onto the tail, comes in low on the 6 o'clock position, and that's it. And they could, in the right hands, they could be thrown around, but just not quite to the same extent as you would get from a Hurricane or a Spitfire. So I mean, it was a case of when they did have successes in the Battle of Britain, it was when there were two instances. I think there was one where Treble 2 Squadron had got and 603 had got between the escorting fighters and formation of hindcorps, and they actually managed to get in and make attacks and do what they were supposed to do, because the actual fighters were actually providing a protective buffer. But it was never guaranteed that they would be able to do that. They were 264. In a very short time in the Battle of Britain, they found themselves really, really at the sharp end. They were moved down from Curtin in Lindsey. They went into Hornchurch, and then when they operated from Hornchurch, they would actually fly forward and operate from Manston at the closest point that you could get. Very much like I think it's referred to Hellfire Corner or something at one stage.
No, that was a little bit further. That was sort of Folkestone.
Folkestone, yeah.
But I mean, Manston, you know, was. Well, I was at Manston recently. You know, it's very close to the coast, to the east coast, and you know, I mean, it was subjected to lightning fast attacks, and it's astonishing, really, that they put the Defiant there. Really,
it does. The thinking behind it is a little bit suspect, but and then it's like, well, they're not really coping. Well, you've put them very much at the sharp end without protection. But it goes to underline that a Defiant unit on its own could not mix it.
No.
With a determined Luftwaffe fighter force. Because they weren't up against amateurs. They were up against people who were very, very determined that irrespective whether it was a Spitfire, Hurricane or a Defiant front, they were going to do their level best to kill you.
Of course.
And they had a very short window in the Battle of Britain, and they lost Philip Hunter. Now, Philip Hunter, absolutely superb leader, incredibly highly regarded, especially by Trafford Leigh-Mallory. And the sad thing was that when they moved down to Hornchurch, he was getting ready to go into a staff position. And they had a guy called George Garvin, known as Genial George Garvin, come in. And Philip Hunter had decided, I am not leaving this squadron until I am convinced that George Garvin can lead the squadron.
Right.
So he stayed on when he really should have moved. He spent a lot of time down at dispersals. 264 had quite an interesting get-up with that. Even admin staff, even like what you wouldn't think were like essential staff, would all be like chipping in at the dispersals at Hornchurch, which were down on the bottom south eastern side, quite away from the rest of the airfield. But they all chipped in. Philip Hunter was spent a lot of time down there, and of course we know he was shot down and he was killed on the 24th of August. And And that was unfortunate because once again
that was the big raid on Manston.
The big raid. They'd come back from a patrol and they were surprised by a load of Ju-88s came in screaming in to dive bomb. Well, part of the squadron was down refuelling. Part were.
Yeah.
Long story short, he got picked off over the Thames estuary. Never seen again. Now George Garvin is now in command, and the surviving pilots and aircrew, and I've got quite a little bit of material about that time. But they say he was a good leader, a good guy, but he just didn't have the experience on the whys and whys of how to use a Defiant squadron.
Well, who did?
Nobody did.
Nobody did.
Nobody did.
And the arguments were there was some of the more senior pilots. They argued the toss that some of the more senior pilots should have led while he was still, but he was thrust into it, and in a very, very short space of time, you can't blame him for the losses. It's just the nature of the combats and the what they were actually facing. But
so the Defiant essentially was removed from the daylight battle, wasn't it? I mean, the losses were horrendous, the slaughter of the innocents and so on and so forth. And then it's pressed into service as a night fighter. And it did sterling work, didn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Whilst the dedicated night fighters, such as the Beaufighter and subsequently the Mosquito with airborne interception radar, were being produced, and the squadrons were awaiting those. So Spitfires and Hurricanes too. None of these aircraft, well, certainly not the Spitfire and the Hurricane. The Defiant may well have been. But the Spitfire and the Hurricane were not designed as night fighters or intended to be even flown at night in that regard. So desperate was the hour. But the Defiant, which as Andy said, was intended to fly and fight at night. So its role as a night fighter, helped us out a lot.
Oh yeah, it did.
No question.
Yeah, I mean it worked exceptionally well in what they refer to as the cat's eyes role. Ground control interception would guide a crew close as they could to a plot, and then the crew had to search visually, looking out for those pinpricks of light from the exhaust. A lot of people think they had numerous kills with radar. They only have one.
Is that right?
The last night kill over the UK was by 264 Squadron in a radar-equipped Defiant, and that's the only one.
Right.
And there's various figures been banded around of like 9, 12, 15, whatever the actual figure is. Those Defiants fitted with Mark II Defiants fitted with AI radar, were few and far between. Everything else was done. All the other kills and claims were done in a cat's eye roll.
Right.
And it's just a shame because when you look from 1940 all the way to 42, the amount of resources that were put in, the idea of putting radar into a Defiant, they were looking at that as early as March 1940.
Right.
And there was an big argument about who is going to be responsible for the radar. And some parts of the Air Ministry wanted the air gunner to be responsible for the shooting, whereas others were saying pilot, because he's the one, obviously, it's going to control the aircraft and get it to the target. In the end, the cathode was fitted in the cockpit, very Heath Robinson, above to the left-hand side of the cockpit, above the oxygen regulators.
Right.
And in some cases, it was a piece of thick sheet aluminium, pop riveted in, with the cathode ray stuck in there, and the controls for the pilot, for the dimmer, and the feedback and all that were down basically at thigh height.
Right.
So the pilot was able to guide in, let the air gunner know, and then hopefully attack. But when you look at it, only the return was only one.
Well, this is all fascinating stuff, and clearly, Andy knows his stuff when it comes to the Defiant. So, we all very much look forward to the book. Now, what we're going to do is, I think we'll break this video here. and we'll do another one. Andy's brought some bits and pieces of. Is it the same Defiant?
Same.
Or is it, okay, so
N3328.
there we are. So we're going to talk specifically about that aircraft and show some of the artefacts that were recovered from the crash site, and we'll talk a bit more about the Defiant. So please tune in and watch that. It'll be released probably a week after this one. We tend to release the videos on a Sunday. Give us feedback, join the conversation, join the community, subscribe, it's all free. Leave your comments below, and let's talk Defiant. So we'll break off now, and we'll speak to you shortly.
Cheers.